Vivian Adler stood abruptly in the conference room of Wolf and Associates, her chair screeching against the polished marble floor. Her voice cut through the silence like shattered glass, every word dripping with 5 years of barely concealed contempt. These two have no claim to anything Klaus built. They are not his children. They are not his blood. They were charity cases he took in out of guilt, and I will not allow them to profit from his misplaced sentimentality. Across the polished mahogany table, Raphael and Isolde Brenner sat in perfect stillness. Their hands found each other beneath the surface, fingers interlocking in that familiar grip they had perfected over years of silent survival. They did not flinch. They did not argue. They had learned long ago that arguing with Vivian never helped. It only made things worse. Outside the tall windows of the Vienna law office, the city of Stephansplatz buzzed with afternoon energy. Tourists photographed the cathedral. Musicians set up for street performances. Life continued as it always did, indifferent to the drama unfolding 3 stories above. But in this room, time seemed to freeze. Herr Friedrich Wolf, the silver-haired attorney who had handled Klaus Adler's affairs for 3 decades, sat at the head of the table with a thick manila envelope before him. His expression remained carefully neutral, though something flickered behind his kind eyes, something that looked almost like anticipation. Vivian was not finished. She smoothed her designer black dress, the one that cost more than most musicians earned in 3 months, and continued her performance. Her platinum hair caught the light from the chandelier above, and her diamond earrings sparkled with every emphatic gesture. Klaus told me explicitly that everything would come to me, his wife, the woman who stood by him through his final years while these 2 ungrateful children did nothing but burden him with their presence. They contributed nothing to this household, nothing to his legacy. They were dead weight, and he knew it. Isolde's fingers tightened around Raphael's. She could feel her brother's pulse racing against her palm, but his face remained stone. They had both perfected this mask, the one that showed nothing, the one that protected them from giving Vivian the satisfaction of seeing their pain. You want to know what Klaus really thought of them? Vivian's voice rose higher, her carefully cultivated Viennese accent slipping slightly in her agitation. She pointed at the twins with a manicured finger, her nail polish the exact shade of dried blood. He thought they were mediocre, talentless shadows of their dead mother who could never live up to the Brenner name. He kept them around out of obligation, nothing more, and now that he is gone, I will not be burdened with that same obligation. She turned to face Herr Wolf directly, her smile sharp and confident. Read the will. Give them whatever token amount Klaus felt pressured to include, and let us end this charade so I can begin rebuilding my life without these 2 anchors dragging me down. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the slight tremor in your hands that you are trying desperately to hide. Raphael stared at the table's polished surface, seeing his own reflection distorted in the wood grain. 23 years old, and he felt ancient, tired in a way that sleep could never fix. Beside him, Isolde clutched the tarnished music box pendant at her throat, the last gift from their mother before the accident that took both parents 12 years ago. This was it, they both thought, the final confirmation of everything they had feared. Klaus had never truly loved them. Vivian had won, and whatever small inheritance might be mentioned in that will would never be enough to build a life on. They were already calculating. How long could they survive on savings? Which friends might offer a couch for a few weeks? Could they find work quickly enough to avoid homelessness? Herr Wolf cleared his throat softly. He opened the manila envelope with deliberate care, and something about his movements made Vivian's triumphant smile flicker almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Adler, he began, his voice measured and calm, you are correct that your husband did create a will that left the majority of his estate to you. Vivian's smile widened. That will was drafted 7 years ago, shortly after your marriage. She nodded, satisfaction radiating from every pore. However, the single word hung in the air like a held breath. Klaus contacted me 4 weeks before his passing. He requested an urgent revision to his estate documents, a complete restructuring of his final wishes. Vivian's smile twitched, just slightly, just enough for the twins to notice. What are you talking about? This document. Herr Wolf lifted a second envelope from his briefcase. This one was cream-colored, sealed with red wax that bore Klaus Adler's personal sigil. This document was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed according to Austrian law. It supersedes all previous versions of the will. That is impossible. Vivian's voice had lost some of its honeyed confidence. Her hands, which had been gesturing so elegantly moments before, now gripped the edge of the table. Klaus would never change his will without telling me. We discussed everything. We were partners. Apparently, Herr Wolf said quietly. This was one discussion he chose to have without you. He broke the seal. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silent room. Raphael realized he had stopped breathing. Beside him, Isolde had gone completely still, her grip on his hand almost painful. According to this revised will, Herr Wolf read, his voice clear and steady, Raphael and Isolde Brenner, the children of my dearest friend Magdalena Brenner, are to receive 95% of my estate. The words did not make sense. Raphael heard them, understood them individually, but his brain refused to assemble them into meaning. 95% of Klaus's estate, the apartment, the music library, the recording rights, the investments. No, Vivian's voice came out strangled. Her face had gone the color of old parchment. That is not possible. You are lying. That document is a forgery. I was present when Klaus signed it, Herr Wolf replied calmly, as were two additional witnesses whose credentials are impeccable. The document has been verified by 3 separate experts. It is entirely legitimate. He continued reading. To Vivian Adler, my wife of 5 years, I leave the apartment at Stephansplatz and an annual stipend of 40,000 euros. Vivian's breath caught. For a moment, something like relief flickered across her face. The apartment was valuable. The stipend was livable. But Herr Wolf was not finished. These provisions, however, come with an explicit condition. He paused, and for the first time, his eyes met Vivian's directly. You must demonstrate, both in the immediate aftermath of my death and going forward, that you have treated Raphael and Isolde with kindness, dignity, and the respect appropriate to the children of my dearest friend. Any violation of this condition results in immediate forfeiture of your inheritance. The silence that followed was absolute. Vivian's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. Her perfectly manicured hands had begun to tremble. A single bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, disappearing beneath her designer collar. This is absurd. Her voice had lost all its polish. It came out raw, desperate, stripped of the elegant performance she had been delivering moments before. You cannot possibly enforce such a condition. How would you even determine whether I have been kind to them? Who decides what constitutes respect? Klaus anticipated that question, Herr Wolf said. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small device, something that looked like a remote control. At his request, this office arranged for audio recording equipment to be installed in this conference room. The system was designed to activate automatically when all parties were present. He pressed a button, and Vivian's voice filled the room. These two have no claim to anything Klaus built. The recording was crystal clear. Every venomous word, every dripping syllable of contempt, played back with perfect fidelity. They are not his children. They are not his blood. They were charity cases he took in out of guilt. Vivienne stood frozen, watching her own destruction unfold. Klaus told me explicitly that everything would come to me. His wife, the woman who stood by him through his final years, while these two ungrateful children did nothing but burden him with their presence. The recording continued relentlessly. Her words about their mediocrity, her dismissal of their dead mother, her declaration that they would have nothing. When it finally ended, the silence was deafening. Raphael could not look at his sister. If he looked at her, he might break, might cry, might scream, might laugh hysterically at the absurdity of what had just happened. Their father figure, the man they thought had abandoned them emotionally years ago, had seen everything, had planned for this exact moment, had protected them from beyond the grave. The recording, Herr Wolf said quietly, includes a timestamp. Your statements were made 7 minutes after I explicitly explained the condition and its consequences. You heard the terms, you understood them, and you chose to speak anyway. I did not know. Vivian's voice had become something small and desperate. All her elegance had evaporated, leaving behind a woman who suddenly looked much older than her 42 years. I was emotional. Klaus just died. I was not thinking clearly. You cannot hold words spoken in grief against me. Klaus was very specific in his instructions. Herr Wolf pulled another document from the file before him. He wrote a letter explaining his reasoning. Would you like to hear what he said about you? Vivienne said nothing. He said, and I am quoting directly, I have watched my wife systematically diminish and demean two young people who already lost everything when their parents died. I told myself it was not my place to interfere. I convinced myself that she was simply adjusting to stepmotherhood, that her coldness would thaw with time, but I was lying to myself. I was a coward who chose domestic peace over moral courage. Herr Wolf's voice remained steady, but something like sadness had crept into it. He continued, I found evidence 3 months ago that Vivienne had been stealing items of sentimental value from the twins. Their mother's journals, performance scores, letters. She had hidden them like trophies, proof of her dominance over children who could not fight back. When I confronted her, she laughed and told me they needed to stop living in the past. Isolde made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Klaus wrote, That was the moment I understood what I had allowed to happen in my own home. That was the moment I knew I had to make things right, even if I could not do it while I was still alive. What do I get then? Vivienne's voice had dropped to barely a whisper. Her designer dress suddenly looked costume-like, absurd. Her diamonds sparkled mockingly. According to the terms of the violated condition, Herr Wolf replied, You receive nothing from Klaus Adler's estate. You are entitled only to personal items you brought into the marriage, clothing, jewelry owned prior to your wedding, and any gifts specifically designated as separate property. Vivienne looked down at herself. The designer dress. Klaus had bought it for her last anniversary. The diamond earrings, a gift from their trip to Paris. The pearl bracelet, a spontaneous present after his successful premiere in Berlin. All of it, every glittering piece of her carefully constructed identity, every symbol of the status she had clawed her way into through marriage. None of it was truly hers. You have 30 days to vacate the apartment, Herr Wolf said. After that time, ownership transfers fully to the twins. Vivienne stood motionless for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. The desperate pleading hardened into something uglier, something true. She turned to face Raphael and Isolde directly, and for the first time, they saw her without any mask at all. You think you have won, she said, her voice low and venomous. You think this changes anything? Klaus never loved you. He took you in because your mother guilt tripped him from her grave, and every day you were in that apartment reminded him of his own failures. You were his penance, never his joy. She grabbed her handbag and strode toward the door. At the threshold, she paused one final time. Your mother was a brilliant violinist and a terrible mother. She chose music over safety and left you orphaned because she was too distracted to notice a patch of ice. You can have Klaus's money and his apartment and his precious music library, but you will never escape the truth. You were unwanted from the day you were born. The door slammed behind her, and in the silence that followed, Isolde began to cry, not the restrained tears she had learned to shed quietly in her bedroom, muffling sobs into her pillow so Vivienne would not hear. These were deep, wrenching sounds that seemed to rise from somewhere ancient and wounded, the grief of years, finally given permission to emerge. Raphael pulled her close, his own eyes burning. His throat felt like it had been scraped raw. She is wrong, he whispered. She has to be wrong. Herr Wolf reached into his briefcase one final time and withdrew a cream-colored envelope. Your godfather asked me to give you this, he said gently. After everything else was concluded, Raphael took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper felt heavy, substantial. The wax seal bore Klaus's sigil, the same one that had marked the will. He broke it carefully. Inside was a letter, handwritten in Klaus's precise, elegant script, the same handwriting that had annotated musical scores, written encouraging notes after performances, signed birthday cards that the twins had kept in a box beneath Isolde's bed. My dearest Raphael and Isolde, Raphael read aloud, his voice fracturing on the first words. If you are reading this, I am gone, and I can only hope I have finally done right by you. I owe you both an apology that should have been spoken years ago, while I still had breath to voice it. I was a coward. Isolde's sobs quieted. She lifted her head from Raphael's shoulder, tears still streaming, but listening now, needing to hear what came next. When Magdalena died, I promised her memory that I would protect you, guide you, love you as she would have. And for a time, I believe I tried. But then I married Vivian, and I chose the easier path. The one that required less confrontation, less emotional honesty, less courage. I told myself you were resilient, that you would be fine, that Vivian was simply adjusting, that her coldness would thaw with time. But I knew the truth. I saw it in the way you made yourselves small, in how you stopped playing music in the common rooms, in the light that gradually dimmed from your eyes. I saw, and I did nothing. Raphael had to stop. His voice had given out completely. Isolde took the letter from his hands, wiping her eyes with her sleeve, and continued. 3 months ago, I found the journals. Vivian had hidden them in a place she thought I would never look, along with your mother's scores and letters. When I confronted her, she laughed. She said you needed to stop living in the past, and that I was too sentimental about a woman who had been dead for over a decade. That night, I truly understood what I had allowed to happen in my own home. I went to Friedrich Wolf the next morning and began putting my affairs in order. I wish I had done it years sooner. I wish I had been the guardian Magdalena believed I would be, but I was not, and I cannot undo those years of failure. What I can do is ensure your future. You have your mother's gift, both of you. Raphael, your cello sings with her spirit. Isolde, your composition work carries her innovative fire. You are not echoes of Magdalena Brenner. You are her legacy, fully realized. The money is yours. The apartment is yours. My music library, which houses some of the rarest scores in Europe, is yours. Use these resources not just to survive, but to build the lives you deserve. More than that, I hope you will use them to help others. There are so many young musicians trapped as you were, by circumstance, by loss, by people who should protect them, but instead diminish them. You understand that pain. You survived it. Now help others. Do the same. I am so very proud of who you have become despite my failures. Your mother would be proud too. I love you both more than I had the courage to show. Klaus. The letter trembled in Isolde's hands. For a long moment, neither twin could speak. The weight of everything, the years of silence, the fear, the grief, the sudden impossible reversal, pressed down on them like a physical force. He saw us, Isolde whispered finally. He saw everything. He was just too afraid to act, Raphael replied, until he knew he was dying, and then he made sure we would be protected. Herr Wolf had discreetly moved to the window, giving them privacy, but now he turned back, his expression gentle. Your godfather was a complicated man, he said. He made mistakes, but in the end, he tried to make them right. That counts for something. Raphael nodded slowly. What happens now? Now you grieve, you heal, you take possession of what is rightfully yours, and when you are ready, you decide what kind of life you want to build. The twins sat in the conference room for another hour, reading and rereading Klaus's letter, processing the earthquake that had just reshaped their entire world. Outside the window, Vienna continued its eternal dance. Church bells marked the hour. Tourists photographed the cathedral. Street musicians played Mozart in the square below. Life went on, and for the first time in 5 years, Raphael and Isolde Brenner felt like they might actually be part of it. But to understand the weight of this moment, you need to understand what came before. The 5 years of silence, the slow erosion of spirit, the survival strategies that became so automatic they forgot they were surviving at all. Let me take you back to the beginning. The day Klaus Adler married Vivian Hartmann was supposed to be a fresh start. That is what Klaus told the twins anyway. Raphael and Isolde were 18 years old, still raw from the loss of their parents even after 7 years, still finding their footing in a world that had proven itself capable of sudden, devastating cruelty. Klaus had been their godfather, their mother Magdalena's mentor and closest friend. When the accident happened, when the icy road and the momentary distraction combined to steal both parents in a single terrible instant, Klaus had stepped in without hesitation. He had given them a home in his Stephansplatz apartment, surrounded them with music, encouraged their talents, told them every day that they were wanted. And for 6 years, they believed him. Then Vivian appeared. She was a former opera singer, a mezzo-soprano whose career had peaked early and faded gradually. At 40, she had reinvented herself as a patron of the arts, appearing at galas and premieres, cultivating relationships with conductors and composers. Klaus met her at a charity event. Within 6 months, they were engaged. The twins tried to be happy for him. Klaus had been alone for decades, married to his music. He deserved companionship. He deserved love. And Vivienne was charming. At first, she complimented Isolde's compositions with apparent sincerity. She praised Raphael's cello technique. She spoke warmly about wanting to be a positive presence in their lives, about blending families, about fresh starts. The wedding was small but elegant. Vivienne wore cream silk. Klaus looked happier than the twins had ever seen him, and for a brief, shining moment, it seemed like everything might actually work out. The shift began subtly, small comments that could be interpreted multiple ways. "Your mother was such a singular talent," Vivienne would say to Isolde. "It must be difficult, trying to compose in her shadow." Or to Raphael, "Klaus tells me your technique is excellent. Perhaps someday it will mature into something truly distinctive." Backhanded compliments, observations that planted seeds of doubt, nothing overt enough to complain about, but persistent enough to accumulate. Then came the helpful suggestions. "Perhaps you should practice in your room, Raphael. The sound carries so much in this apartment, and you know how sensitive Klaus is when he is preparing for a performance." Or, "Isolde, darling, your composition notebooks are cluttering up the music room. Would you mind keeping them in your bedroom? This is a shared space, after all." Small surrenders of territory, tiny retreats that seemed reasonable in the moment, but accumulated into something larger, something that looked a lot like disappearing. Klaus noticed nothing. He was deep in the busiest period of his career, conducting across Europe, preparing for recordings, mentoring young musicians. When he was home, he was tired, distracted, grateful for the domestic peace that Vivienne maintained in his absence. He did not see the twins becoming quieter, did not notice how they avoided the common areas when Vivienne was present, did not register the way they flinched, almost imperceptibly, when her heels clicked down the hallway. Or maybe he did see, and chose to look away. The twins would wonder about that for years. The real cruelty began in the 2nd year of the marriage. Vivienne had established her dominance over the household by then. The apartment that had once felt like home now felt like occupied territory, every room carrying invisible tripwires. She criticized Isolde's compositions openly. "Derivative," she would say, flipping through pages of careful notation. "Your mother's influence is too strong. You need to find your own voice, if you have one." She interrupted Raphael's practice sessions constantly. "That phrase again? You have been playing the same 4 measures for an hour. Perhaps you should accept that some passages are beyond your current abilities." She controlled their access to Klaus, scheduling dinners and events that required his presence, ensuring the twins were always somehow excluded. "Oh, this invitation is only for 2, you understand." And she undermined them to Klaus himself, planting suggestions that would blossom into doubt. "The children seem withdrawn lately. Do you think they resent me for taking their mother's place? Perhaps they need more independence. Perhaps we are hovering too much." Klaus, trusting and conflict-averse, took the bait. He gave them more space, which meant less time with them, which meant less opportunity to see what was really happening. The twins tried to speak up once. It was the 3rd year. Raphael had finally gathered enough courage to approach Klaus in his study, to explain how Vivienne made them feel, to ask for help. Klaus listened. He nodded. He said he would talk to her. That night, Vivienne cornered Raphael in the hallway. "I understand you had a little conversation with Klaus today," she said, her voice silky smooth. "How interesting that you would go behind my back like that. I wonder what your mother would think about such disloyalty." She stepped closer. "Let me be clear. Klaus loves me. He married me, and if you force him to choose between his children and his wife, you will not like the outcome. So I suggest you learn to keep your complaints to yourself." She smiled. "Unless you would prefer to find out what it feels like to have nowhere to go." Raphael never tried to speak to Klaus again. The 4th year brought the theft. Isolde had kept her mother's journals in a locked drawer, along with performance scores annotated in Magdalena's handwriting, letters their mother had written to Klaus about her hopes for her children. These were sacred objects, the only tangible connection to a woman who had been gone for over a decade. One afternoon, Isolde came home to find the drawer forced open. Empty, she tore apart her room searching, then searched the entire apartment. found nothing. When she confronted Vivian, the older woman's smile was almost pitying. "I have no idea what you are talking about. Perhaps you misplaced them. You have always been a bit scattered." Isolde knew. She knew with absolute certainty that Vivian had taken them, but she had no proof. And when she tried to explain to Klaus, he sighed and rubbed his forehead and said he was sure there was a reasonable explanation. The next day, Vivian made a comment about their mother, something cruel, something that suggested Magdalena's death was her own fault, that she had been careless and selfish and left her children to suffer the consequences, and Isolde slapped her. The sound echoed through the apartment. Vivian touched her cheek, and her expression transformed into something triumphant. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," she whispered. "When Klaus is gone and I inherit everything, you will be out on the street, where you belong." If you are feeling what Raphael and Isolde felt in that moment, that helpless rage, that suffocating frustration, share this video with someone who needs to know that things can change. And keep watching, because what happens next will restore your faith that justice exists. The 5th year was the worst. Klaus's health began to decline. Heart problems, the doctor said, stress and age, and too many years of pushing himself. He spent more time at home, which should have meant more time with the twins. But Vivian controlled access like a gatekeeper, scheduling his rest periods, managing his visitors, deciding who could see him and when. The twins watched their godfather fade from a distance. They watched Vivian perform the role of devoted wife, bringing him tea, adjusting his pillows, speaking in hushed tones about his care. They watched and said nothing, because they had learned that speaking changed nothing, until the final argument. It happened 3 months before Klaus died. Late at night, after a performance the twins had attended without Vivian's knowledge, they came home to find Klaus and Vivian in the master bedroom, voices raised. Klaus was yelling, actually yelling, which he never did. The twins froze in the hallway, barely breathing. They heard fragments, something about journals, something about cruelty, something about children who deserved better. Then silence. The door opened, and Vivian swept past them without a word, her face a mask of contained fury. Klaus did not emerge. In the morning, he was gone, back to Prague for rehearsals, and when he returned 2 weeks later, he seemed different somehow, quieter, more watchful, like a man who had finally seen something he could not unsee. He hugged the twins longer than usual. "I love you," he said. "You know that, right?" "We know, Dad." The word slipped out before Raphael could stop it. The word they had never used. The word that acknowledged what Klaus had really been to them all along. Klaus's eyes filled with tears. He went to his study and closed the door. And 3 months later, he was dead. The telegram arrived during a performance. The twins were playing in the Staatsoper, Raphael on cello, and Isolde accompanying on piano. A messenger slipped backstage and handed the envelope to the stage manager, who passed it to them the moment they exited. Klaus Adler, massive stroke. Prague, did not survive. They caught the midnight train, sitting in stunned silence as Austria slid past the windows. Isolde clutched their mother's music box pendant so tightly it left marks on her palm. At the apartment, Vivienne was waiting. She wore black silk, perfectly composed. No tears, no visible grief, just the calm, controlled demeanor of a woman who had been planning for this moment. The funeral was 3 days later. Vivienne performed magnificently. She accepted condolences with gracious sorrow. She spoke movingly about her beloved husband. She positioned herself at the center of every photograph, every reception line, every moment of public mourning. But the moment the last guest departed, her mask fell away completely. "You have until the will reading to enjoy this apartment," she told the twins. "After that, you will pack whatever Klaus was sentimental enough to leave you, and you will never contact me again." She disappeared into the master suite without another glance. The twins sat together in the dark living room, holding hands, planning their survival. Which friends might offer shelter, how quickly they could find work, whether their meager savings would last long enough to find their feet. They expected nothing from the will. Klaus had been under Vivienne's influence for years. Whatever promises he might have made to their mother, whatever love he might have felt for them once, it had clearly faded. They were on their own, and then the will reading happened, and everything changed. Now you understand what that conference room moment meant. Now you understand why Isolde sobbed so hard she could barely breathe. Why Raphael sat trembling with Klaus's letter in his hands. Why the revelation felt like being pulled from drowning water at the last possible second. For 5 years, they had believed they were unseen, unloved, burdens to be tolerated, and eventually discarded. And all along, Klaus had been watching, failing to act, yes, too afraid to confront the problem directly, but watching, and, in the end, planning. He had not abandoned them. He had simply been too weak to save them while he was alive, so he made sure he could save them after he was gone. The apartment felt different after Vivienne left. She departed exactly 28 days after the will reading, loading her pre-marriage possessions into a rented van without a word of farewell. The twins watched from the window of Klaus's music room as she drove away, and neither of them felt anything like triumph. Relief, yes, an easing of tension so profound it left them dizzy, but also grief for the years lost, for the relationship that might have been if Klaus had found his courage sooner, for the versions of themselves that had been slowly eroded under Vivienne's constant pressure. They walked through the apartment, room by room, seeing it with new eyes. In Vivienne's former dressing room, hidden in a locked drawer she had forgotten to empty, they found everything: Magdalena's journals, her annotated scores, her letters to Klaus about her hopes for her children's future. Isolde sat on the floor and read them all, tears streaming silently. "Your daughter has your fire," Magdalena had written, "and your son has your tenderness. They will do remarkable things, Klaus. Just love them. That is all I ask." They restored Klaus's music room exactly as he had kept it, his conducting baton collection displayed on velvet, his scores organized by composer and period, his favorite armchair positioned by the window where he had always sat to read. It became their sanctuary, a space where 3 generations of music seemed to breathe together, and slowly, carefully, they began to heal. Raphael started practicing cello in the common areas again. The sound filled the apartment for the first time in years, echoing off walls that had grown too used to silence. Isolde composed, not in hiding, not in her bedroom with the door locked, but in the music room with the windows open and the Vienna street noise drifting up from below. She wrote a piece called Vigil, about watching over someone who could not watch over themselves. Klaus would have loved it. They returned to the conservatory to complete the degrees they had deferred during Klaus's illness. They made friends. They laughed in public without checking first to see if anyone was watching. They learned, slowly, what it felt like to be safe. But Klaus's letter kept returning to them. Help others who felt unseen. He had written, "You understand that pain. You survived it. Now, help others do the same." 6 months after Vivienne's departure, the twins made a decision. They would use their inheritance not just to build comfortable lives for themselves, but to create something larger, something that could reach other young musicians trapped in situations like theirs. The Magdalena Brenner Foundation was born. Its mission was simple and radical: provide emergency housing, instrument access, psychological support, and world-class instruction for young musicians escaping difficult or abusive home situations. Raphael handled the business side, discovering a talent for administration and fundraising he had never known he possessed. Isolde designed the curriculum and support structures, drawing on the psychology studies she had added to her composition work. They rented an apartment building in Vienna's 4th district and renovated it into a residence. They hired counselors and teachers and house managers. They created a 24-hour hotline for young people who needed to talk. The first resident arrived 3 months after opening. She was 17 years old, a violinist from Salzburg whose stepfather had destroyed her instrument in a rage and told her she would never amount to anything. Sound familiar? She arrived with nothing but a borrowed suitcase and a broken spirit. 6 months later, she performed Brahms at a foundation showcase, playing on an instrument the foundation had provided. She was crying by the final note. So was everyone in the audience. That was when Raphael and Isolde knew they were doing something that mattered. The foundation grew. What began as a single apartment building expanded into a network. Programs in Prague, where Klaus had spent so much of his career. In Munich, where Magdalena had first made her name. In Paris, the city where the twins had been born and where their parents had fallen in love. Each location served young musicians who had nowhere else to turn. Each provided the safety and support that Raphael and Isolde had been denied for 5 years. Hundreds of young people found refuge, found guidance, found second chances, and with each one, the twins felt something shift inside themselves. The wound did not disappear, but it transformed. It became the source of their purpose rather than the center of their pain. 5 years after Klaus Adler's death, Raphael and Isolde stood on the stage of the Musikverein. Vienna's legendary concert hall was packed. Critics and patrons and fellow musicians filled every seat, waiting for the premiere of Isolde's newest composition. She had called it Requiem for the Silent. It was dedicated to everyone who had ever suffered invisibly, who had endured cruelty behind closed doors, whose pain went unwitnessed because the people who should have protected them chose to look away. The piece began with a solo cello, played by Raphael, a single voice in darkness, uncertain and searching. Gradually, other instruments joined, a violin, a viola, a piano, each voice tentative at first, then growing stronger as they found each other. The middle movement was turbulent and painful, full of dissonance and unresolved tension, but the final movement opened into something unexpected, not triumph exactly, but peace, acceptance, the hard-won serenity of people who had survived their worst moments and discovered they were still capable of beauty. When the last note faded, the audience sat in stunned silence for 3 full seconds. Then the applause began. It grew and grew until it became a standing ovation, 2,000 people on their feet, some of them openly weeping. But Raphael and Isolde were not looking at the critics or the patrons or the fellow musicians. They were looking at the 2 rows of seats reserved for the Magdalena Brenner Foundation. 24 young people sat there, residents and graduates and staff members who had traveled from across Europe to witness this moment. They were crying too, but they were also smiling because they knew what this music meant. They had lived it. After the performance, the reception stretched until midnight. Critics offered praise. Patrons pledged donations. Journalists requested interviews about the foundation and its mission. But eventually, the crowd thinned and the twins slipped away. They took a tram back to Stephansplatz. The apartment building rose above them, warm light glowing from familiar windows. Inside, they climbed the stairs to Klaus's music room, their music room now, though they still thought of it as his. Snow was beginning to fall outside, fat, soft flakes that caught the streetlight and sparkled like scattered diamonds. They stood by the window, watching the transformation. "Do you think we did what he asked?" Isolde's voice was quiet, reflective. Raphael considered the question. "I think we did more than he asked. I think we took his failure and turned it into something real, something that helps people who feel the way we felt. We could not have done it without the pain," Isolde said. "No. But that does not make the pain okay. It makes it meaningful, though. Does that count for something?" Raphael put his arm around his sister. "It counts for everything." They stood in silence, watching the snow blanket Vienna's ancient rooftops. The same city where they had felt so trapped now felt full of possibility. The same apartment where they had learned to make themselves invisible now held the warmth of genuine home. Their journey could have ended differently. It could have ended with Vivian's prediction coming true. 2 orphaned nobodies, cast out and forgotten, struggling to survive while she enjoyed the fruits of Klaus's labor. It could have ended with bitterness, with rage, with a consuming desire for revenge that poisoned everything it touched. Instead, it ended with this: a snowy Vienna night, a successful premiere, a foundation that had changed hundreds of lives, and 2 people who had learned that survival was not enough, that healing was possible, that the pain of being unseen could be transformed into the gift of seeing others. Klaus would have been proud, Magdalena would have been proud, and somewhere, in whatever place exists beyond this world, perhaps they were both watching. Perhaps they finally saw their children clearly, not as burdens, not as obligations, not as shadows of greater talents or echoes of past glories, but as themselves, Raphael and Isolde Brenner, musicians, survivors, healers, fully realized. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs hope right now, someone who feels unseen or trapped or like their pain will never end. Let them know that things can change, that justice exists, that the people who hurt us do not get to write our endings. Like this video If you believe in second chances, comment below and tell me what part hit you hardest. And subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. Isolde touched the music box pendant at her throat. The tarnished metal was warm from her skin. We should play something, she said. Now. It is almost 1 a.m. Raphael smiled. When has that ever stopped us? He retrieved his cello from its stand. Isolde settled at the piano. They did not discuss what to play. They did not need to. After 23 years of silent communication, of hand signals and coded looks, and the deep understanding that comes from surviving together, they knew. The first notes of their mother's favorite piece filled the room. A Brahms lullaby, simple and tender, the song Magdalena had hummed to them every night before bed. The snow continued to fall outside. The music drifted through the open window into the Vienna night. And for the first time since childhood, Raphael and Isolde Brenner played without fear, without performance anxiety, without worrying about who might hear or what they might think. They played for joy. They played for healing. They played for their parents and for Klaus and for every young musician who would pass through the foundation's doors seeking the safety they themselves had been denied. They played because they could. The piece ended. The last note hung in the air, then faded into the soft whisper of falling snow. The story continues, Isolde said quietly. Raphael nodded. It always does. They covered the instruments and turned off the lights, but neither moved toward their bedrooms. Instead, they settled into Klaus's favorite armchairs, wrapped in blankets, watching the snow transform the city into something clean and new. Tomorrow there would be interviews in foundation business and the 1,000 small tasks that filled their days. But tonight there was only this. 2 people who had survived the worst and discovered they were capable of building the best. Their story had not ended in that conference room 5 years ago. It had begun there. And the music they would make together, the lives they would touch, the healing they would facilitate, was only just reaching its opening movement. The best was yet to come.